Yeah, so this is Blackness in the Erotic, or Black culture in the erotic, actually. And the thought for this particular um, talk, Fear of a Black Planet, Blackness in the Erotic, was, well, Fear of a Black Planet is, it obviously, you know, for you music heads out there, it comes from an album from Public Enemy. And this was their third studio album. The album itself explored many issues from the Black community, empowerment being a major theme of the album. And it was designed to explore depths and layers of not only Black culture in America, but sonic depths, different sounds and textures. And they wanted to, Chuck D especially, wanted to find the spot within the peaks and valleys of the songs that would bring out what feels to me like a bomb transmission during stage performances. And so my aim is actually to explore Blackness and the erotic in the same kind of way. And you know, it's like Fear of a Black Planet, right? So, you know, I think when I think of that term and when I think of that album, there's something around, you know, the automatic assumption that it is white folks or like not Black culture that fears a Black planet. But I would have to say that Black people probably fear just as much. And, you know, on some level, I think fear just as much. Otherwise, there probably would be more of a quote unquote Black planet. And not because of the potential for fighting or contentiousness, but really just because underneath there would be a need to take on, express, and lead with ever more power. And this power, though it's like almost naturally possessed, takes a lot of responsibility. And that's not fun. It's not an enjoyable process. And that shift, you know, that that sort of changing of the guard would be a big one. And so there, to me, feels like there's a possibility for a lot of fear, you know, a fear of actualization, a fear of realization of the true power that lies within Black culture. So, but if there's anybody who can make the changing of the guard and responsibility of power fun, it's Black folks. So, you know, we'll see. Yeah, so the series, it's a 4-part series. It's going to be every Sunday around this time. I'm in Louisiana, so a lot of the southernisms come through. It's even more feminine than usual. So the series will focus on traits of what a Black planet would be infused with, what a more erotic planet would be infused with, because they will be one and the same. So we're going to go through a total of 3 sutras, and we're going to kind of read through the sutra, and then I will actually kind of give a layout of the principles of Blackness and the erotic, and show how they kind of meld together. So, the first one that we're going to start with is, Matt, if you could pull that up for me. The excellence of the involuntary. And so what I'll do is I'll read it. It'll sit for just a second and kind of let it go in and digest. And then I'll start kind of laying it out. And the principles, a lot of the principles are just going to come from what was laid out in, well, we're still working on what the actual title of the book is, but the Black Book. And more of a fleshing out of like what is seen here. So the purpose and endpoint of Eros is to bring us into a totality of being beyond the limited ideas of who we are. To do so will require a reintegration of what we have denied and a release of what is not true to our direct experience. Eros calls us into an excellence beyond the finite excellence we can achieve through the rational mind, and to what we might call beauty, flow, resonance, and an awareness that things are as they are, and there is no more than this. It calls us into an ever-changing realization of absolute sufficiency. At the core of erotic intelligence and its principles, the expression of eros can be felt. To experience this in a continuous and repeatable fashion, the mind must be trained to follow with exquisite response this now activated force within us. It is an incorruptible guide expressed in peak experiences, creative, sexual, spiritual. Eros reveals a new standard. Attended to, it moves us to the edge of known reality and beyond. Our natural expressions, tears, blushing, laughter, cannot be performed because they arise from the involuntary system. We come to know who we are beneath our attempts to make ourselves anybody. We place this above all else and recognize it is an art, because the one thing we cannot make ourselves do is be natural. We cannot fake the appearance of eros moving through our body, the swelling of lips, the flushing of cheeks. We cannot fake eros moving through our creative being, the experience of genius coming through. We cannot fake eros touching our spirit, as all things fill with presence. Okay. And so why I started with that one specifically was primarily because number one, in my interpretation of it, there is a deep emphasis on not just like of flow and creativity, but of embodiment and what happens when you are more, when there's more embodiment and there's life being lived more through the non-rational than the rational, or at least there's more of a balance. Whereas in, I would say a lot of, we'll say quote unquote dominant culture, there may be more of the rational leading than the non-rational. And as any sort of erotic practitioner knows, there is or has experienced, there is a tendency to want to make the life in the rational it is the exalted kind of form of life. And so that kind of leads to a lot of not pleasant times for those that live in the non-rational, or uncomfortable times that way. And so in a lot of ways, that's just living in Blackness, and there's a piece from the book that starts, in every culture, it's called something else. Flow, being in the zone, touching universal oneness. But really, it's just Blackness. It is what happens when we make connections between concepts and words and ideas. When a freestyle rapper is flowing, he's drawing connections between words, concepts, and rhythms, while at the same time making a rhyme. Before the word flow came to symbolize a feature of peak human experience, it had been long used in hip hop to describe a rapper's cadence and style. Because creativity is such a powerful flow trigger, creative people are usually more primed to access flow than others. Black culture is nothing else if infinitely creative. And so I wanted to draw those parallels between the two, because it is simply flow, but it is flow. It is like there's the erotic flowing through you. There's Blackness flowing through you. And in that, creativity flows through you. The living in the daemon is just kind of like, it flows through you. Your natural expression flows through you. And that to me is the epitome of what the involuntary is. It is natural, spontaneous expression. And what I come to kind of understand is, if we look at the Sutra, the excellence of the involuntary, there's the idea that the main goal of Eros is kind of to bring us into a totality of being. It kind of transcends the limited idea of who we are. And, like, I just kind of have to say that, like, there's a lot of like, not worship isn't the, like, it can't go to that location, but there's a lot of admiration for like Black culture, for athletes and entertainers and artists. And then there's a lot in Black culture that's like, hey, you don't have to be an artist, you don't have to be an entertainer, you can be, whatever else. And it's like, but when that, to me, because there's such the proliferation of Black athletes and Black entertainers and Black artists, is because there is that embodiment, that there's an internal screaming of, hey, I need to be expressed. I need to have this expressed. There are things going on around me that I can't say, or I need to, like, this, like, my body needs to have these things flow through me so that I can express and be who I am. Now, if the intention, and often the intention is, at this point, particularly because these have become ways out of, we'll just say, like, dire financial situations or environments, these have become ways to, the intention of these tend to become something a little bit more rational. They become formulaic. They become less of a natural flow and just more of the rational. And that's done to get a certain external validation, whether that be money or fame or whatever. But that's not how it started, and that's not all that's occurring. And I think, like it says, it's like Black culture is nothing else but infinitely creative. And so it doesn't matter how, to me, it doesn't matter how many people come through in which, there is that look for the external validation. The creativity is never going to stop. Like, it just can't. Like, it just can't. I don't believe that it can. And that is because of the sort of inherent embodiment of Blackness, Black culture, Black folks. And in that, the totality of being requires sort of you have to be able to reintegrate that which has been casted out and denied. And for all that is, well, I'll put it this way, everything kind of starts at home. Like, there's an old Southern church saying that, like, charity, it's not even like, it's kind of like charity begins at home, right? Like, you can't necessarily go to the church and tithe your 10% if your kids aren't eating at home, and it's like, the reintegration of what's been denied has to start in Black culture. It can't start necessarily of, like, looking for the external validation of what has been, quote unquote, like, denied. And I believe there's quite a bit of it. And that whole piece that I kind of just described around Black athletes and artists is one of those areas. But it is just simply the expression of who you are as a human and who you are as a Black person. Let's see. And then there's sort of an excellence beyond rationality. I'm home in Louisiana, and if I get a kind of mean looking face on, it's only because I'm hot. But there's also one of the young guy neighbors has, like, pipes on his car. So I want to spare y'all from that. Anyway, life in the South. So, so excellence beyond rationality. What that means to me, particularly in regards to Blackness and the Sutra, is, I think culturally, excellence is seen to be what is the highest realm of rationality. or the highest realm of the rational mind. And what can that get you? Um, and and there's an interesting shift, and I feel like this actually happens with a lot of artists in general, where you have to, there becomes this question of how do you balance between the non-rational creative and be a business person. I mean, on some level, I'm even personally kind of in this quandary. And there's that shift of like just creating for you, or just creating because this is what your being or your soul wants to manifest itself as. And then that kind of rationale comes in, and it's like, well, for you to be a successful artist, you have to make this amount of money, or you have to be seen by this person, or so and so has to buy your art, you know. And but there's an excellence beyond rationality, right? Like there's an excellence just to know that every day you give as much as you can to your creation. Every day you give as much as you can to living your life as an erotic artist, living your life as the fullest expression of your Blackness. And that can look in so many different ways. And to me, like Eros calls for us to experience a beauty, flow, resonance, awareness of things as they are, and nothing, like with no more, no extra, right? It invites kind of us to look at the dynamism of life and continue to touch all those points. Where is the beauty? How can I stay in flow? Where's the spot? Like, where's the resonance? Am I on the spot continuously? And keeping that continuous resonance. And it's funny, I didn't actually have this. I didn't have this example, but the interesting thing is, like, the first thing that came up when I just said that was that is on some level how you kind of have to be as a Black person in America, to stay, so that you aren't driving yourself crazy, not necessarily like, like not even looking, I'm not looking at, any kind of external circumstances or situations, but it's more like, how do I see my environment as beautiful? How do I see this country as beautiful? How do I see the people I interact with on a daily basis as beautiful, even if what is being reflected back to me isn't? How do I stay in flow, but like in flow in the sense of how do I keep expressing and being myself, regardless of any of these things? And then how do I stay in resonance? How do I stay on the spot? Should I code switch right now? Do I need to code switch right now? Like, or can I like, I was in a Whole Foods, and I think somebody was with me, and they saw it in action. They didn't quite understand it, where I was in San Francisco in a Whole Foods, and they saw, like, there was this Black woman checkout lady, and she was just talking, she was like, oh my God, thank you so much, to the people in front of me. And they were like white chicks. And it was like, thank you so much for coming. And like, we really appreciate your business and blah, blah, blah. And then we looked at each other. Once they left, we looked at each other and we were like, oh yeah, we can do that. Like, and then it just became like a whole other conversation. Like, hey girl, how you doing? You good today? Like, yeah, that's good. Like it was that other conversation, and like staying in resonance in, is it okay to do that here? Does she need to, like, is there a manager nearby and she needs to make sure she doesn't look too, whatever? Or like, can we go straight hood today? We don't know. It just depends on like, how is the vibe? Like you have to constantly feel into that. And everybody does, but like in this particular context. And the way of being able to sense that through the body as opposed to, or through the non-rational as opposed to the rational. Because, sometimes I will go up to a counter, and if the Black chick looks a little too like uppity, then I'm going to speak to her in an uppity way. But then she'll surprise me and be like, "What's up? What you doing?" I'm like, "Hey, oh," and then I'd be I'm like pleasantly surprised. But that's because I'm not feeling the thing underneath, you know. And then the awareness that things are um, as they are, and I think that's just general approval. But that's also a foundation of finding the beauty. And I believe that we wouldn't have a lot of modern music today if there weren't a bunch of Black people finding some kind of beauty or being able to make beauty out of not awesome situations, not awesome living situations, not awesome. And I'm saying not awesome, but we all know what I mean. Um, and so that's kind of the foundation of everything. It's not necessarily like it's finding approval, but it's not necessarily co-signing things where it's like, okay, well, this isn't that great, but for us to have resilience and for us to be able to move through and keep going. And that's that term, and to keep going is it's like it's almost like we shall overcome, where it's like, how do you keep going? How does that mom keep going when her children have been sold off? Up to like, how does that mom keep going when her last son was shot, out in the streets because she hasn't been able to move them out into a better neighborhood? Or, like it doesn't have to even be that dire. Like, how do I keep moving on when, I had this 6-figure job and I thought that like, getting all these masculine accolades was gonna have me living the life that I want to live, and I was gonna get the bag, and then now I don't. Now I have to go like file for unemployment or something. It's like, how do I keep going? And that is just it's brought so many gifts to this culture and to the American culture at large. And it's really, there's some mental rearranging that has to happen for that to continue to happen. And for me, that is, you're shifting some things to be like, okay, well, I got to drop back down in, like, okay, well, my light bill, hasn't been paid. I gotta, let me shift this. Or like, somebody said some terrible stuff at work. I got to shift this because I need to keep that job, or whatever the case may be. It's like a continuous mental shift around the rational to drop into the actual kind of necessity of life, and sometimes it's done better than others, and sometimes it's not so much. We're all human. Let's see. And then there's an erotic intelligence. There's an intelligence of the non-rational. And like I was just saying, like those little adjustments that the mind has to make, those often have to be made continuously and repeatedly, depending on where you're at. So, like I said, like I was talking about the code switching, if I'm kind of more out in the world, there's like these little shifts of like, well, it's an interesting spot. I don't know there's this one time, I brought a friend home with me, and we went to this coffee shop, and it was a Christian coffee shop. And it was where my sister lived. So it was like way more white people. I'm in Shreveport right now. It's like Shreveport's Chocolate City, but this was not Chocolate City. This was East Texas. And so we went in, and I've never really had like palpable shame about dating women, but I went in there and it was like, I felt it. I was like, oh, I got to like dampen something about myself so I don't look a certain way so that I can actually like enjoy my time in this coffee shop. I've had this experience often as a Black woman but not in that way, where it's like, if I go in the store, or when I would, I would be driving someone's car and it's a really nice car, and I'm kind of parked illegally in, say, like Santa Monica, and it's like, well, what happens to me if somebody comes and knocks on the door and says you can't park here? You know, that's a whole, like, there's whole variations of that. But I found if I like shifted a little bit, like my friend actually helped me shift my mind a little bit, and I had to do that in other locations where if you continue to shift, you can follow that internal kind of safety of like, no, if I'm chill, I'm probably actually just going to be okay. Walking through Washington D.C. at 2 o'clock at night by myself, like a not smart person. What, like, shifting? No, I'm actually going to be okay. I just have to remember I'm going to be okay. Just remember you're going to be okay, and that translates into the body, or that actually comes from the body, and it gets translated into the mind. I'll put it that way, and then that's what is felt, and that's what's felt to those around you, and then you can respond with perfect response. So when I'm at home, when I'm here, especially when like my brother or my sister are here, our conversations are cut down in half, because I can already feel what they're about to say, and vice versa. Like we kind of play a game with it where it's like, what I'm talking about, and I'll know what they're talking about, even though like my mom might not, or like people around us might not. But it's being able to tap into that perfect response and being able to turn off these various parts of the rational mind to get into the body, to be able to respond to your environment in resonance. And when you're able to do that well, I would say, you are able to access flow more easily, or get into a flow more easily, or catch a flow. You're able to freestyle. There's a training. I think for some people that comes super naturally, and for a lot of rappers, they have to kind of like, they just have to practice it. And it's not necessarily that they're learning from someone else. They're just learning how to do that within themselves and access it. Excuse me. And then when you're able to do those, you kind of hit those peak experiences. Now, there was this joke that I think we used to say, where it's like, if it's offensive, it's offensive. I'm sorry. But it's like, white people like extreme sports, and black people prison, or like, those kinds of things. And it's like, but those are the same kind of experiences. Those are peak experiences in a certain way. There's an intensity. There's a heightened sensation throughout the entire experience of whatever it is that you're doing in those particular locations. And well, I'll say professional sports. We'll say professional sports and extreme sports. And you're more able to hit those creative, you're more able to hit those sexual, and you're more able to hit those spiritual peak experiences. And this to me is the best place to see all three of these in action, I would actually say, is not a Beyonce or a Rihanna concert. It's actually a Southern Black Baptist church. There is the creative coming through, particularly from the choir and the musical director, the drummer, whoever else they have on hand, that back and forth. If there's women doing like runs and stuff, and then feeling how that, like, each run actually takes you to a higher peak, and then it kind of lets you settle in for a little bit, and then it takes you to another higher peak, and it lets you settle in for a little bit, and then they kind of reach you to the peak, and then the preacher kind of comes in and brings it down to a little bit, to more gravity. But what's actually been happening the whole time is, as they're reaching you higher and higher peaks, they're actually pulling you down into a grounding in each peak, so that when they come back up, you can go higher and higher with them. And as you're doing that, the preacher comes in, and he generally is kind of the sexual aspect of it. And just go with me on this one. And then the spiritual realms, right? So in those accessing those higher and higher peaks, you're getting closer and closer to spirit. But really what you're doing is like you're getting closer to spirit as your soul is coming further and further down. So they meet together, and boom, you got the Holy Ghost. People are dancing everywhere. People are speaking in tongues. That is the purest involuntary I feel like I've ever seen, and it used to scare me. And I actually understand why, because I was like, oh, these people are out of control. I don't want to be out of control. Well, it's like, no, you actually do, because it feels so good. And it runs throughout the whole of the church. It's not just the choir. It's not just the preacher. It is the entire church. You can feel it as everybody gets on board. It gets higher and higher and higher and higher. But it's not a lightness. There's no lightness to it really at all. It is. It feels more like a rich and saturated expansion. And so we got that. We got that piece of it. And then just the involuntary nature of Eros and Blackness. Your true nature comes from let's just say your involuntary system. It can't be performed. And I think you see this most. Well, I think you actually see this most in dancers and professional athletes in particular. I've had a friend who, she danced for Alvin Ailey for a little bit, and I'd never seen her dance before. And when I did, I couldn't speak. It was the first time I actually saw someone's true nature channeling what was in there, what you always kind of felt from them, but you never actually there were no words for it. I was completely captivated, and I couldn't talk. And I was like, holy, it was like those moments in church, but it was coming from one woman dancing by herself. And with professional athletes, they train and train and train, but what they're training to do is to be able to listen to what is needed next without thinking about it. And it's kind of like, if someone's a good player, you'll see it, because that's like, for whatever reason, whatever a good player entails, those pieces of that person's true nature will come out in those locations. This is a weird stretch, but just stay with me on this one. So if you look at like the latest sort of like proliferation of Black quarterbacks, and there was a thought that like being a quarterback was very cerebral, kind of, you had to have a certain intelligence to be a quarterback. But if you look at the guys now, they're really active. They're able to kind of run and think, but they're not thinking. The true nature has kind of come out of who they are, with the bodily intelligence and the mental intelligence, but where they don't actually have to think about it anymore. Like it is actually like there's a greatness that comes out in those moments because they aren't using their rational mind, because they are in their involuntary in a certain way. And what that does is it takes us back to that excellence outside of the rational, where you get moved to a location that's well beyond what you know. It's just well beyond what you know or what you think you know. It goes beyond that. It goes into you don't actually know, what you like. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Like you don't know who you are until that kind of spot comes up. So your reality beyond who you think you are or who you know yourself to be becomes the new reality. And you can't, because you just can't fake that coming through you. You can't fake creativity coming through you. You can't fake being touched by, I mean, people can fake, going to like the Holy Ghost, but you can feel it, so like you're not actually fooling anyone. And the way that I'm kind of tying all this up is in all these locations, there is the spirit and the soul, or the soul and the spirit, because it's more soul than spirit, but that's a whole other conversation, of Blackness that is, it just can't be faked in a certain way. And I don't mean like, you speak a certain way, so you must be more Black, or like, if you are high yellow or whatever, like you're less Black, or like, you grew up in Massachusetts, so you're less Black, like there's an underlying thread that just can't be faked. And it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter where you grew up. Once it's touched and felt, that's your reality, whether you accept it or not. There's a reality of Blackness. And all of that kind of lies in a certain embodiment and expression and life led through the involuntary, through flow, through creation, through resilience, hopefully through nobility. We'll work our way up to that one. And it's an art. It is very much an art to be able to live in that way. And I think it's not really, it's recognized when it's commercialized, but it's not really recognized in a way that outside of commercialization, it's not really recognized, let's say, in a certain way, in the rational. It isn't placed above the rational, except in Eros. And so where it is placed above all else in Eros, there are certain pockets of Blackness where it is also placed above all else. And then there's certain pockets of Blackness where it's like secretly placed above all else, but you have to like pass, like you have to kind of be out in the world in a certain way. Or there's like that dichotomy of like you're one person out here and then you're another person in here. And then there's places in Black culture where it's not placed above all else at all, simply because that need for a certain external validation equals safety, or equals what is believed to be safety, whether that's physical safety or economic safety. And that losing that safety is a large part, in my opinion, of a fear of a Black planet. It's like responsibility has it be that that you have to sort of integrate those things, and you have to kind of really take the chance and have the courage to live in that location all the time, as opposed to I'm gonna live over here with my homies, and then when I go out to my job, I am no longer, I don't know, Sea Dog. I'm like, it's not even that stereotypical, but like I don't have a nickname. My name is Chester, and I'm so happy to be with you today. It's like, no, I'm all of me in all locations, and that's scary. That's scary for everybody. But taking that level of responsibility has to be that you allow yourself to access that involuntary in the whole of your life. And again, that's whether you're with your family, whether you're with your friends, whether you're coworkers, whether you're, you know, in whatever relationship, you know, and there's something that has it be that the rational, um, it just feels safer, you know, but, you know, like it's not really, you know, like you aren't actually like using your God-given gifts of being able to know exactly what's going on because because you can feel it, and then maybe use the rational to kind of like lay it out and get it articulated. But you shut that off, and it's like, you know, um, if we go with the most common fear of, you know, young Black boys, the rational says that you need to act a certain way around police, you know. But there's, to me, there doesn't feel like there's a teaching of like, but you also need to like be able to feel what's happening in here, because all that's going to be felt is fear. And then when you feel a lot of fear, they feel a lot of fear. And then nobody knows what's actually going to happen. And then it turns into this whole thing because everyone's confused and afraid, you know? Um, or even like, it makes me think of like, even like going to go get a job or whatever, you know, like if I'm, if I'm having thoughts about, you know, am I not going to get this job because I'm Black, or like, is my hair okay? You know, that stuff actually does get translated, whether you say it or not. And so it doesn't keep me, it really doesn't keep me as safe as I want it to. Uh, and that's a fear, you know. I have this theory that 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 particular safety actually started, you know, in a sense, once those who were slaves came off the boat or came off the boats. And there was a sense of, oh, you know, we're in a place that we don't know. This is horror. It's just pure horror. Not even like there was horror before on the boats, but coming here, you don't know who you are. You don't know where you are. You know who you are, at least in that moment. You don't know where you are. You don't know, you know, what is going on. You don't know what's happening to your children. There's a genuine helplessness. There's a genuine helplessness. And then somewhere along the way, there just became a learned helplessness. And for as much as there has been the keeping of the involuntary, the keeping of the embodiment, the keeping of the ever growing, actually, resilience, the expression, the creativity, the keeping of that, there's still a continuation underneath of a certain learned helplessness. And my personal belief is that, and by the way, I'm not couching, like I'm not saying my personal belief in that like some doubt that it's wrong. I personally believe it's right, but I'm just saying that, you know, for people to be able to like have their own wrestle with the ideas. So my personal belief in that is in that continuous learned helplessness, you know, there then becomes needs for external markers of safety. And at this point, a lot of the external markers of safety have nothing to do with what's really safe, what is inside of you to tell you, hey, you're actually okay. It is easily accessed, but it is not easily heard, I think, these days. I think, you know, the external markers of safety are European-based labels, designers, flashy cars, jewelry, money. These are your external markers of safety. I've walked down the street and watched a woman grab her purse and think to myself, lady, the clothes that I have on right now cost way more money than I guarantee is in your purse. but I'm supposed to be safe in these clothes. I'm supposed to look safe in these clothes. That's not the case. You know what I mean? Like there's always that kind of transmission of things. So I have no idea how to wrap this up. But there will be 3 more of these. And we will leave the conversation here for now. I hope some of that made sense. The involuntary, flow, eros, blackness, creation, blackness, and the erotic. What I would love to do is to get more just kind of like reflections, and not reflections necessarily on me personally, but like how things kind of landed, how they felt, what felt like it made sense, what maybe didn't, you know, those types of things. So I would love to get some reflections of those.
Raise your virtual hands and I will choose you. Rachel Kane.
Courtney, I love this so much. I really love the part where you talked about, you know, we don't talk about, like, we talk about how to be appropriate, but we don't talk about what's happening inside. And that is what creates dissonance. And I obviously don't have any personal experience about your experience or the Black experience, but I know as a woman, that's definitely true too. Where if you're having an internal experience that doesn't match the external politeness experience, and that can create violence and the feeling of unsafety for everyone involved. And I just think that's really so important to talk about. And and I think that you're saying that, you know, there's an inherent understanding of that language, and we just need to kind of marry those two things, or like bring the inside out, I guess is what you're saying. And I love that this is a place that we're starting to do that, and you're starting to do it.
Thanks, Rach. Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
Bob.
Hi, Courtney. Really enjoy the talk. I love when you mentioned that that Black folks probably have as much a hard time embracing or having more Black culture in their lives than white people. Because I've always looked at it as, from the perspective of me being Caucasian from the suburbs, and and have never really, I just never looked at it that way. I've never really thought about what it's like, to be a Black person in America and to be absent of, a lot of the beauty of the culture, and to have their own set of, of fears and stuff. I mean, it's kind of funny thinking about it, and it just made me think about my experience a lot too, which was, I just had such an affinity for it because it's like, the culture that I came from was, it's like you live in boxes. You don't have like a lot of connection with people. You write, it's like you do your schoolwork, and it just felt to me like there was something more. And I found that in music, in jazz and blues in particular, and then the writings of like Malcolm X, and and there was something that that I really discovered through the want, the want of something more. But that's, I guess, a little bit of a tangent. Anyways, thank you.
Were you about to say finding it and writing reports, Bob? Have you been writing reports since you were a little kid?
Yeah, that's what they taught me at school.
Figures. Feels right.
Thanks, Bob. We got 3 quick ones. Actually, they're coming in. All right, these last 4. Here we go. Let's go with Angela.
Hey, Courtney. Say hey to me. Okay. I first of all, I just want to, what I wrote in the chat, which is just like thoughtful and evocative. I just feel like I know you said don't give you reflections, but here we go. And it's like, I just felt like you took us through so many different pieces, whether we were at the church or the code switching at the supermarket or this place or that place. I feel like we just traversed a lot of different points within the Black cultural experience and tying it to the Sutra. I just thought that was really masterful and skillful. And I just really enjoyed the whole journey that you just took us on. And I was thinking, I had this thought, or something that landed for me was, all of a sudden I was almost like, oh, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because all of a sudden I was like, oh, it's not like the Pentecostal folks were like, oh, let me do this embodied thing that's happening. It's like, oh no, that is the origin of it. And so when you said something about, and maybe, what did you said something about, and then hopefully maybe nobility. And I thought to myself, oh, it is a remembrance of nobility. It's not trying to ascertain, get to some place, reveal something, come out into something. It's like, no, that is actually, it is inherent in the DNA. Blackness is actually the first color of which all else emerges. And so there was just something about that and the way that you wove it, which I thought was just very powerful and beautiful. So I'm taking that away. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to take that with me.
Lisa.
I didn't mean to shoot you. What is that? Like, I need a different, sorry, culture.
Courtney, first and foremost, it was really beautiful to be held by you. Like, what a gift. There was a moment when you were talking about being on the boat that you transmitted in a way that like I felt it, and I felt like this like rumbling in my belly. It was really weird. It's like this feeling I've only had when I've been pregnant with my children and they flutter when they're little, and like there's like this fluttering feeling before they start kicking. So I was like, ooh, what is that? So I just wanted to like notice that when you were speaking about that, I felt that in my belly. And then what I'm taking away from this call is like, there's this place where I avoid conversations about color because I'm uncomfortable. And then there's this place where like I judge people around me that I perceive them to be racist, and then in some way like I close my heart to it. And then what I've also noticed is while you were talking about like how I realized how I've kind of sold out to my own culture in a way, and went to the rational of like being polite and being, this is what I have to look like and this is how I have to talk. And it's really had me really think on this call, like where I kind of lost myself and where I look down at people in my own heritage and my own line who don't, fit the box or the mold. So thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate you sharing that.
And yeah, last.
Hi, Courtney. Really great talk. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. I just love how you described the Baptist, and how like that is the place where you see all elements of Eros, from like genius to flow to creativity. And so I just really love the description of that, and it had me look at it in a different way. It's like I've had a felt sense of it, and to hear you describe it like really landed it in place.
Thank you. I made this little video. I call it Black Church, and it's juxtaposed from people who are kind of in the spirit. They're basically they call it praise dancing, but we've never called it that. I don't know where that came from. But they're in the spirit, but it's juxtaposed. You don't hear the music that's playing. It's playing some kind of like lighter, more airy, almost more exalted music, but you can still feel that transmission underneath. And it just like, it made me think like that's what that was my thought for it when, basically what you just said, yeah, that was a thought for like, you can really kind of get lost in the music. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but to to be able to kind of see it in a certain way, there's a little bit of a step back that you kind of have to do for it to kind of be transmitted in a particular way without you being in it. And so I'm really happy that kind of occurred. Yeah. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
I have this last reflection. I just really appreciate how you're connecting this all to the sutras. Just like it's such a deep work and it has so much instruction on just being, and that we can find ourselves in it. And you're showing us how we're there. I look forward to more. So I look forward to your next talk.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, everyone.